Hey there. I want to talk about psychic kids today. Were you a psychic kid, or maybe you have one? Maybe you're raising a sensitive child, an empathic child, or a child that's having a lot of psychic experiences. I think all of us are born psychic, some more than others. Um, so you probably have psychic kids, and maybe you were one too. And I was totally one. And I was way back in the day when that wasn't cool. It wasn't an easy thing to do. And I was kind of one of those I see dead people kids. And in fact, my very first memory was I remember lying on my back in a crib. So I must have been like a baby and seeing all of these like glowing gold people, like blowing kisses and waving, and there was like rainbow light. It was really, really beautiful. And I felt like they were like the welcoming committee, like, welcome to Earth, kiddo. We're rooting for you. And then I was so sweet. And then my mom came into the room and they all just like vanished, and I was like, wow. That's my very first memory of anything ever. And I think as we get older, we tend to close off our connections. Like oftentimes when we were kids, we encountered a lot of stuff. I was really lucky that my parents weren't like trying to squash me flat. I think they didn't know what to do. But they weren't like, trying to really suppress it. And I think as adults, if we look back at our own childhood, somewhere along the line, you may have um, encountered some resistance or fear, or you might have really seen things that were not so much fun. And I think kids in general, and I have a theory that kids are, as we go through this sort of evolution of humanity, that kids are coming in even more psychic than they were before. Every generation is more psychic than the last. I don't know if that's true, but it's certainly what I observe. So maybe your children see relatives who've crossed over, like, oh, Grammy's here. They might tell you about the creepy lady that lives in the attic, or they stare into the corner of the room. One of my kids used to do this. She used to stare into the corner of the room where nothing was and sort of giggle and wave. And then all the cats were or in the dog were looking in that same corner of the room too. And they'd be like, oh my God, what's in there? Or maybe they tell you about their imaginary friends, their imaginary friends that they're hanging out with, it maybe like spirits and not so imaginary after all. When my son Grayson, when he was about 5 years old, he woke up from a nap and kind of walked into the kitchen. He was kind of like got that glassy eyes that they look like when they have when they just wake up from a nap. And he says, Mom, don't let Devin, that's his little brother, don't let Devin walk on the ice. The last time he did that was a long time ago, and he fell through the ice and nobody could find him. And everyone was really, really sad. And then he looks at me dead in the eye and he goes, but you weren't our mother then. And he turns around and walked out. And I'm like, oh my God, he's remembering this past life that he had with his brother. And I have to tell you, I was totally paranoid about let any of the kids, but especially Devin, walk on the ice. I just wouldn't let them do it after that. Now, I think there's so many stories of kids who remember their past lives, kids who see spirits. It's super interesting. And sometimes the spirits aren't always so great. Sometimes they're seeing things that are difficult, maybe suck spirits or negative energies of kinds. And that happened to me growing up in a super haunted house. I mean, what can I say? It's around, right? And I also noticed that a lot of us sensitive adults have sensitive psychic children. And I see this pattern happen a lot where you as a parent may have not been in a position to acknowledge your own gifts. Maybe you denied them. Maybe you were just didn't have time to deal with that. You're doing other things until you have a really psychic and sensitive child. And then, like parents do, we kind of like jump into the deep end of the pool and like figure everything out. You're figuring it out, and for your kid, and as you're figuring out for your kid, you're also opening up your own senses. um it's sort of like sometimes it's we'll do for our children what we wouldn't do for ourselves, and it's everyone benefits. I think that's common and also really interesting. And I know, like, a lot of times we shut it down because it's really no picnic, and that's certainly how it was for me as a child growing up in the 70s. I was born in the 60s, so I was growing up in the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. And I remember like driving away from my grandparents' house and knowing it was going to be the last time I saw my grandfather alive. I would see all kinds of spooks and spirits and see angels and beautiful things, but also sometimes difficult ones. And I really had no idea what was going on. It's not like there was a lot of information about this at that time. So I spent a lot of my childhood trying to figure out what it meant, what was happening, what to do about it, how to turn it off. And on top of all of that, just trying to pretend to be normal in public, which I don't know how successful I was at that. But if you have psychic kids or sensitive children, there are a couple of ways you can help them out. This is what we needed that we didn't get, and what we can offer our children too is first of all, we're going to try and validate their experiences. So, at the very least, don't tell them they're wrong. Don't say there's anything bad about what they're doing or run away screaming. And a lot of the adults that I train in my psychic development classes tell me that as children, their psychic experiences freaked out one of their parents. And, if we're really sensitive as children and we feel like we're freaking out or scaring our parents, we just stop doing it. We're like, we shut that down right there, I've heard stories about kids whose parents like dragged them to church and had the priest throw holy water on them. So we don't want to squash them or punish them. We don't want to run away screaming. We want to really support them. And even if you're not experiencing the same things they are, just be open and curious about it. Ask them to tell you more about it. Let them know it's okay for them to tell you if the things get uncomfortable for them. Like, I don't feel good about this, right? And then we try and problem solve that. Maybe you can ask them to draw pictures of what they're experiencing and then try not to freak out when you see it, right? I think that the next thing we can do is really give them a context to understand it all. And that's going to be different for every family. So you want to try and find a way to help them understand and a little bit of metaphysics that fits in with your family's faith traditions. And I think that's really important. So you might help them answer the questions like, where do people go when they die? Why do they come back for a visit? Are there good spirits and bad ones? Help them figure all this stuff out in a way that makes sense to your family's belief systems. And especially if you're dealing with a little older kids or teens, please understand that letting them learn things on TikTok or digging through paranormal TV and movies, which is what I did as a kid. There wasn't TikTok around when I was a kid, but I was like searching for information, and I got a lot of information by watching horror movies, which sort of had a 50-50% chance of being real with the true, like, actual useful information. And then the rest of it was just crazy Hollywood stuff, and the same thing for whatever they're finding on the socials. It's not an accurate or useful source of real information for them. So we want to try and create a framework for them to understand what's going on and normalize it in a way that fits with your family's faith traditions, whatever those are. I think that the next thing we want to do is help them feel empowered by giving them some tools and also the agency to use those tools. Setting boundaries and saying no is a big part of that. That they're allowed to say no and set a boundary. You can teach them how to call in their own spirit guides if they need help and protection. And that's where prayer can really help. And dipping into the traditions of your own belief systems. So like when my kids were little, I taught them how to call in their angels. And they had this little rhyme that we would do, like a prayer before bed. I had them draw pictures of their angels and give them names. It was super cute. And then they posted the pictures of their angels at the four corners of their bed. And when they felt uncomfortable, they could call on those beings, or maybe call on grandpa who passed away that they loved and he's still hanging around them. Like they have spiritual help that they can use if they're feeling uncomfortable. I think that we can do things like put salt lamps in their room at night to help kind of keep down the spirit traffic. That really, kids love that. They make great night lights, and they tend to just create an environment that's a little more comfortable for negative spirits to walk through. Also, fish tanks or running water in general, fountains, fish tanks with a filter work really well in kids' rooms too. And then whatever else tools they like when I was a child, I was fascinated by rosaries, which was so funny to my like hippie Unitarian parents who didn't have rosaries. It's not something I grew up with, but I loved them and I used to kind of collect them. They made me feel safe and comfortable. Um, so these tools are all about helping your kids understand that they don't have to be silent observers who don't have a voice and can't say no and have no tools. And because if they're that way, they often feel really at the mercy of things they don't understand. I think it's if you're dealing with an empathic child, which there's a lot of crossover between empathic and psychic children, they're in many ways the same thing. Empathic children are really dialed into the emotional energy of the situation and may or may not be having psychic experiences too. But if you have an empathic child, again, we go back to boundaries, helping them understand that they're allowed to say no, that helping them practice lots of different ways to say no, and maybe beginning to have conversations about what's theirs and what isn't theirs emotionally. So here's one thing you can really help if you have an empathic child is to help them make the difference, tell the difference between your feelings and their feelings. So if your child comes up to you, your empathic kid comes up to you and says, "Are you sad today, mommy?" You say yes, if you are. And tell them it's not about them. Yeah, you're right. I really am sad today, but it's not about you. You don't have to say more. You don't have to say why you're sad. But if you say, "No, honey, no, I'm fine," they're going to go, because they're going to, what they're feeling isn't matching the spoken word. And that makes sensitive children feel crazy, unsteady, insecure. It makes them doubt that what they're sensing is real. So every time we can validate, what they're feeling and help them make the distinction. Yes, mommy's sad. It's not about me. I'm okay. They're like, okay. And in empathic children, you'll just be like, God, you'll see their face relax and they understand what's happening now. They don't want to know why you're sad. That's not the important thing, just that you are. And they can start to sort of reality test here, right? I think the other thing we can do is really encourage imagination. So we can play games with them that encourage imagination, read with them, really get down in there and help them expand their imagination to keep their psychic senses open and not sort of shut that down. I also think if you're dealing with psychic insensitive children, you need to give them a break. They need sensitive kids need downtime and they may need alone time. They may need time where there's really minimal stimulation. They might need a lot of time between activities. They may come out of a very stimulating environment feeling really limp. And I remember coming home from school, like it took a lot for me to get through school. And then when I got home, I just needed to be left alone in a quiet corner with a snack and a book, preferably outside, and I wish I had known at that point how to clear my energy field. We can kind of teach children how to breathe, how to release the energy they picked up from other people, all the things we need as adults, as sensitive and psychic adults. Maybe you help them picture that they're in their energy bubble. And one of my sons had a hard time in public places. He was really empathic and feeling everything. And I could see him, like, we go into right before we went into the Kohl's or Target, wherever we were going, he'd be like, and then if I taught him how to breathe all the way down to his toes, put his bubble up, it was better for him. So you can take what you're learning about your psychic abilities and transmit that to your children in sort of an age appropriate way that gives them some really hands-on tools. Anyway, so I hope that's helpful. I'd love to hear any comments you have about your psychic experiences, or any of your kids. Let's talk about it.